Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Spin Podcast, which is a golf business insights episode of the podcast, sports strategy and digital approach. I'm your host, Tom Bentley, Director of Communications and Events for the Confederation of Professional Golf. So to all our listeners across the world, welcome to the show. And joining me today is a face, and if you're listening, a voice who's probably quite familiar to those from across the CPG. It's Executive Director for Digital and Membership, Aston Ward. Aston, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
And today we're going to be focusing on a sort of digital strategy, sports strategy, and actually giving a bit of a sort of case study or focus on some of the work that you've been doing across the membership and the digitalization and collaboration project. But we'll get a bit more into that a little bit later. So you're a PGA professional, and we've worked together for the last couple of years for the CPG. And just for the viewers who perhaps aren't familiar with who you are and what you do, could you just give a very quick run through of your career and your golfing career from the start to the end?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. It's a very strange scenario to be interviewed by someone who's a friend and we know so well, and we've worked together for a number of years. But I think actually that's going to result in hopefully a better outcome for the listeners as well. But yeah, I think giving a bit of background to myself is always, it's my specialist subject is to mention about me, but I won't labor it. But also I think it helps I think a lot of it helps to sort of set up how I've ended up into doing the role that I'm doing now. So I've played golf since I was, about 5 years old. I was very lucky where I was brought up in Surrey in the south of England to be very close, literally 100 meters, less than 100 meters away from a golf club, and always had golf as part of my, DNA, if you like. My dad played, my uncle plays, and family members play and things. And so I always knew that I wanted to be within golf in some way. And then as I got a bit older, I started to sort of get a bit better. Still not great, not a particularly great amateur career overall, but I knew that I wanted to kind of go into that realm of, working in golf and then becoming a PGA professional. And so I really focused on that from literally the age of sort of 14, 15, trying to get my handicap down and also trying to get onto this specific degree course that you and I both did at Birmingham University in the UK, which was Applied Golf Management Studies. So having done that, I really pushed myself forward, but I was very open to how I would work in golf. I liked coaching. I liked the technicalities of the game, but I didn't particularly think that I would probably become a coach. I thought I would be already then thinking about leaning more towards the business side and perhaps the management side. And then it was only really when I did my summer placements, as you'll know better than anyone, in the 3 summer periods of university on AGMS, we did summer placements to go and get us out into the field and get some experience. And I did my first one at the club that I'd been brought up at Pine Ridge down in Surrey, which was great, working under the guys there like Pete Sefton, people like Greg Brody. That was really, really good, but it also didn't really take me out of my comfort zone because I'd already worked there before university and I knew the guys so well. So I really threw myself into it for the second placement, and an opportunity came up to work in Lithuania, and that's under a guy called Nick Solsky, who's back in Manchester at the moment. And that was really out of my comfort zone. That was the first time I'd ever had the chance to live and work abroad. And it was amazing, and it was so different. The culture is very different to the UK. The golf culture is very, very different to the UK. At that point, they only had sort of 130, 150 registered golfers, a handful of golf courses, and the course that we were working at, which then was called the V Club, is now the Vilnius Grand Resort. It was only just opening up the golf course, even though the hotel had been there for a long time. So we kind of had carte blanche to go in and do what we wanted, if you like, with the golf course, and it was fantastic. And that first summer led me into the second summer, and actually what I realized there is I really enjoyed doing the sales and marketing side of things. So I was still coaching, I was still doing the starting, washing buggies, doing literally a bit of everything. But the sales and marketing and the online stuff, digital stuff, was really interesting to me. And that's when I came back the second year with more of a focus on doing that. So I worked, still for Nick, but a little bit more at a sort of slightly higher level, if you like, in terms of having been there and experienced it the summer before, and then having a more of a focus on sales and marketing and generating particularly inbound tourism because of the small domestic market. And that was amazing. I really enjoyed that. And I did that second half for just over 6 months and then came back to the UK. But I knew that I needed a bit more grounding, a bit more sort of theory in marketing. I'd kind of found not my niche, but I'd found what I liked. And I needed a bit more theory. So then I managed to get a job in London, right in the middle, just off Oxford Circus, for a social media agency called Jam, which was part of the Engine Group. And the Engine Group had a load of different agencies all focusing on different things, and we were the social media arm. And that was amazing because, one, the working environment was nothing like I'd experienced in sort of golf or up until that point anyway. Commuting in and out of London has its bad points, but also was exciting, and it was a exciting time to be in and out of London. And then the client that we actually worked on, so we were in a small team that would focus on a particular client, was News International. And so for anybody who doesn't know, News International is a huge global organization that owns different newspapers. At that time, they had the Times, Sunday Times, the Sun, and News of the World. And I think the News of the World at that point was one of, if not the oldest newspaper in the world. And that was great. And so that really took me to then working on the agency side, dealing with the client and how you approach that as a team in terms of the planning and the strategy that goes behind it, and then working with the client to get that activated. So a huge amount of experience. There's a big long backstory to then how that kind of went, because as probably UK listeners will know, the News of the World ceased to exist. And actually it was right at that time when I was there. So that was quite an interesting period that I won't go into the detail, but again, the experience that it gave me was incredible. And I remember actually that one of the key things there, and that for me, in my head at least, and perhaps for some others, the newspaper was announced as being closed down via a tweet. And at that point, there weren't a lot of things being announced by tweets or on Twitter. And so it might not have been the catalyst, but it was certainly one of the first occasions where, there was some sort of big breaking announcement that was put out via Twitter as the first medium. So yeah, that was very exciting. Then an opportunity came up to work back in Surrey, again for the guys at Precision Golf, which is a sort of a club fitting and club building enterprise. And those guys are fantastic, and that they will really work. This is a bit of a sales pitch for them. They'll really work wonders for your game, but they're just such nice guys. And it was a really, really enjoyable time to work for them. And I did the sort of marketing function and a bit of the administrative function there as well. And then this opportunity came up to join, as we were then, the PGAs of Europe. And I'd spoken to Ian Randall, our CEO, a couple of times, and the role was new. So I think he was feeling in the dark a little bit as to, where we need to go with it and what we can do. And equally, I was coming at it from quite a fresh approach, and then was able to sort of secure that. And then, since then it's gone by in an absolute flash. And we've really, again, I sort of had an opportunity there where it was a little bit carte blanche, as in, there wasn't a comms function for our organization up until that point. Any writing in particular had been outsourced, or there would be in a sort of agency that was doing some work on a retainer basis or something like that, but certainly nothing in-house. So I felt very free to come in and turn that into what wanted it to look like. And since then, I'm really proud of, the platforms, the channels that we've created, how we've grown them, how they serve a function. They're not huge in terms of numbers, but that's not, Tom, you'll know better than anyone else. That's not how we see success. We talk about quality over quantity. The numbers are increasing, and that is really important for us. And I think we've always punched above our weight to an extent, but actually the numbers are, if you like, catching up a little bit with that now. But again, it's still got to be the quality over quantity, really. And we've worked really hard. And then, as you know, in the last couple of years, Tom, you've taken more of a handle over the communications aspects. You've sort of taken that off my plate a little bit, if you like, and continue to grow it and continue to make it even better and grow it and grow it. And as we'll discuss, today, we've gone through, particularly in the last 18 months, a huge change in our kind of mentality and mindset behind what we're doing with these channels, what we're doing with our digital strategy overall. And that's led on to the project. And so I've taken the project, which I'm sure we'll get to, and then you, Tom, have taken on the kind of dealing with the comms on a more daily basis, and you've done a fantastic job with that. So I'm very proud of where we've got it to, and I can see how it's going to progress as well, and that's important. I don't think we've ever stagnated. I don't think we've sort of plateaued particularly. I think we've continued to see really nice growth over those sort of eight years or so. And yeah, the project is now a bit of an animal in itself, but I really believe that this is the right thing that we should be doing, and I'm looking forward to sort of going into a bit more detail.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thanks for the top line summary there. So yeah, obviously, as you mentioned, I came in a couple of years ago, and that time's flown. So I don't know what the 7 years for you has felt like with the CPG, but so you've obviously alluded to the digitalization and collaboration project. And before we get into the nitty gritty about that, let's maybe backtrack, because this was an idea that came about before I started. So could you explain where the idea came from in terms of the platform and the project, what it was for, what was the issue that you were trying to address, really?
Yeah, definitely. So the project is collaboration and digitalization, and not necessarily the easiest to say, and ultimately will probably have a catchier name, but it's actually served to be a huge pivotal point or pivotal element of the organization and what we're doing. And it's easy for me to sort of big up the thing that I'm responsible for, because obviously I'm biased towards that area, but it's had an effect in every single area of the organization, whether that's education, whether that's events and tournaments or whatever it might be. And really, and that's what we aim to do with it. So it's the best part of 3 years ago now, really, that we had the kind of thought to it that we need to keep progressing as an organization. We need to ensure that we are future proof, that we're not too reliant on external bodies or sources of income or whatever that might be, so that we can be self-sustainable and so that we can ultimately do a better job of serving the members. And ultimately what that comes back to is thinking more being more commercially minded, thinking more like a business perhaps than we ever have done, and taking ourselves, as Ian puts it, from being an administrative focused element to actually being a commercially driven organization for the betterment of the members, the member countries. And so we put together a couple of different ideas, and what that formulated into was the project, and the two sides of the project being, one, the collaboration. So we knew that we wanted to re-engage the members on a level that we hadn't done before. We've always had very good relationships with the countries. We've always spoken to them on a fairly regular basis, but often it would be, particularly if you're going back sort of 5-6 years ago or something like that, there were often occasions where you might only see someone from a certain PGA once a year at the annual Congress at the back end of each year. And yes, you might speak to them via email in between, but not a lot, perhaps otherwise going on. And also a focus perhaps on the membership where we were waiting until they put their hand up to ask for help or to request assistance or to make use of one of the various member benefits, as opposed to us going to them and presenting them with opportunities. And certainly what I've found is we need to be more proactive with that, because they're obviously very concerned with running their own organizations and aren't necessarily able to think on a wider basis about how they might be able to look to a wider support structure. So the collaboration was all about engagement, all about finding out more about the member countries, finding out more about what makes them tick, what they need, what they want, and then re-engaging them on a higher frequency and in a much deeper level as well. And then you had the digitalization side, which was we've known for a long time. I mean, all you've got to do is look at the sort of history of, certainly in my time, 7 or 8 years of working for the organization. We're very much digital first. And I would argue strongly that we've been digital first when digital first wasn't as cool as it was more recently, because we had to be. All of our organizations are geographically spaced apart. Yes, a lot of them are based in Europe, but that's still a few thousand miles to cover. That's still 2 to 3 time zones minimum. And now, especially as we push on to 42 member countries, at least at time of recording, that is global. That's South America, North America, Europe, Africa, and I think Asia. Depends on what your definition of Asia is, because obviously 2/3 of Russia is in Asia, so that would count. And then we've got some in the Middle East and that kind of stuff. So, we're across a lot of different time zones. We have to be digital first. We just wouldn't be able to communicate effectively if we weren't. And so, knowing that and having done a lot digitally already, we knew that there would need to be a digital focus to the activity. And we knew that some kind of platform is going to be required to drive that. We've always had a desire to get a sort of CRM, a customer or consumer relationship management system in place that would help drive that. And that's really the core of the platform itself.
Yeah, that's great. So that's kind of culminated in, you mentioned the collaboration section. I often get asked by people who aren't involved in golf what I do and what the organization does. And the analogy I always refer to, I don't know if there's any Game of Thrones fans out there, was in the season 1, he was going on about the 5 armies and the one and the fist. And it was like this. It was that sort of element of, instead of having 42 organizations, it was that one organization mentality that's the key to what we're doing now, isn't it? That's the point of getting people to collaborate and work together, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we in the last, I suppose it's probably just shy of 2 years ago, certainly 18 months ago, we've had this CPG Thrive as our strategy. And then as part of that one CPG, and really, particularly from our perspective in the comms, is utilizing the words like collective, collaboration, togetherness, those kinds of words that indicate, we are talking about having something that's greater than the sum of its parts and working together on that basis. That working together was the tagline of the PGAs of Europe for a long time, and it still stands. But actually, we've sort of moved that forward particularly from an engagement perspective. And really, that's what we tried to do. And the project has been a big, maybe the catalyst, but nonetheless a sort of driver to that, which is making sure the countries feel like they're part of the organization. And the PGA of Finland is a partner organization to the PGA of Lithuania. And they're not just separate organizations that might meet on occasionally or might speak occasionally, but actually they feel like they're part of the same thing. And equally, going up a level, if you like, that they feel like the CPG is part of them, the international arm, the support, international umbrella support structure that they can access and gain benefit from their membership of and from the collective. It's absolutely at the heart of a lot of the activity we're doing now, is these fundamental principles, which actually are core to the project. If the collective work better together, then you will definitely create efficiencies, business efficiencies, operational efficiencies. You will definitely create savings of resource, so time savings, cost savings, whatever that might be. You will definitely create economies of scale, being able to share resources and being able to access, certain services, whatever it might be, for much less than you might be able to achieve on your own. And then creating new revenue streams, or making the existing revenue streams even better. And fundamentally, particularly on the revenue generation side, none of our member countries are going to achieve what they want to, basically, without the right revenues coming in that enables them to drive action. And they've been really, really important principles of the project. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned, I think in the previous question, about the sort of transition away from a governing body or to a more commercially minded organisation. Obviously, there's benefit to the members, but I'm just thinking very generally now, in terms of if I was somebody who was perhaps working for another sporting organisation, who perhaps is developing a digital strategy, what, as a rights holder, does the platform or a digital strategy bring in terms of commercial value to an organization?
Yeah, so particularly digital has allowed a real shift from a commercial perspective, and as you say, rights holders and that kind of stuff. Digital's allowed a shift for it to become more accountable, basically, for you to track the return on investment, for you to track engagement and actually apply metrics and numbers and data to things that we know existed before, but perhaps weren't able to be measurable, perhaps were argued to be intangible, that you couldn't really measure. And the digital strategy element has become so important to allow, effectively to allow those things to take place, and to allow digital activation that can reach people like never before, and can target people like never before, and can personalize to people like never before. So I think particularly from our side, we're looking at the creation of new assets. So we've had assets, asset would be described, one of our tournaments, for example, a championship would be one of our assets, but actually driving more digital based assets that we can have. The platform in itself is an asset, as well as the functions that will be able to do. Then you've got monetizable assets that can be tracked, and not just from the ROI, but actually in how they're created. So let's take podcasts, for example, whilst we're speaking on one. Now podcasts have really good metrics behind them. You can track how many people are listening, how many people are sharing, how many people are sharing across social media. Well, you can convert that into a monetizable element. That is easy to do. Whereas before, if you were speaking at an event, maybe a physical event or something like that, it's a lot more difficult to gain the ROI on that. And then really it's reaching audiences that otherwise might not be able to be reached, and automating that process, targeting, personalization, as I said before. And that's something we really want to focus on, and we think is actually a hugely valuable part of the platform itself. So this digital platform that we're working on, because once you have the data in the center, there's so much opportunity and so many things that you can do with it, to the point of utilizing the data to personalize the message, to make it more relevant, and therefore make it more actionable. And it's got to be all about that. So it's really important that you have a clear understanding of how the asset will work operationally, and how you can create efficiencies and automations as part of that, combined with then how you can measure the outcomes of those and the KPIs, the metrics that are behind them as well.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I know the world's changing and data's always been there for a while now, but what the digital platform does, it almost consolidates all that data and actually effectively uses it in the way that we want it to use it. So for other organizations, that's sort of the principle of it. It's all right collecting data and having it readily usable, but it's actually finding a way to use it appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. I think in my mind, there's been, it's a bit of a sweeping statement, but I don't feel like golf has done a good job of using its data. I don't feel like clubs use their data very well. I'm not so sure a lot of pros use their data so well. I think there's a lot of room to grow in that space. And to be honest, a lot of it has to start with consolidation, cleaning the data, so you actually get, you can actually do, use it, and then assessing what you have and what you can do with it. And now, for not a lot of money, you can add layers of sort of machine learning on top of that, or at least software and platforms that help you to do these things very, very easily from your armchair for not a lot of money. So I think, I suppose you could argue we've not been so good with our data in the past, and we want to get better. Having this in the middle, which is based around a CRM, connecting those countries together whilst enabling them to stay autonomous and look after their own, they manage their data, but there's still consolidated data that's used by the collective. That's going to be invaluable. And it's the good thing about it is that every time we have different conversations, you think of different uses. You think of it, and I'm sure we haven't thought of a lot of the stuff that in a few years' time we'll be doing. It'll all come out from that.
Yeah, you mentioned the benefit around to the PGAs, the economies of scale, that sort of thing. What effect or what impact will the platform have on the men on the ground, the PGA pros, the people working on the front lines, driving the game forward?
Yeah, so our desire is to create it's maybe not the right terminology, but a one-stop shop for PGA membership. So what we'll be doing with the platform is giving each PGA country, if they want it, of course, it will never be forced on them, but if they want it, an administrative system that will help them run their organization. It'll be integrated with different systems and have a variety of different functions. I think we mapped out 9 functional areas, and within those 9 areas, there's easily 100 different functions that can be done, different activities that we can do throughout them. The PGAs having that system allows them to then deliver and communicate in a much more effective way to their individual members. So there's this big balance that PGAs need to get right, and I suppose any membership organisation, ourselves included. You offer a value proposition, and you have to ensure that it is meeting the wants and needs of the members of that organisation. And you don't really want a disconnect there. You want it to be clear to the individuals what they're getting from the organisation. And PGAs have had to manage that fairly manually up until now. You know, there's a huge amount of manual operation involved. Well, our plan with the platform in place is that those countries will have the system they need to be able to do that. So from an individual member's perspective, they will be able to have a one point of access where they can get in, and on a simple level at least, they can manage their entire membership, including the dealing with their subscription process each year. And then they can get their membership card, which will include an international side. So obviously with a digital membership card, you can do more stuff with it. You're not just limited to 2 sides of a plastic card. You can have as many sides as you want. And we can also add in things like payment wallets and different activities like that we've got planned. So that's kind of the minimum level, if you like, of what they would get. But on top of that, we're giving the PGAs the tools they need and the channel itself to communicate to their members. So that might be general news articles, that might be, you know, education-based articles, features, content, videos, podcasts, whatever it might be, but also partner messaging, member benefits and that kind of stuff, and landing pages where they can access the benefit very easily and convert, all automated, no hands-on element from the PGA side. And then as well as the other opportunities, for example, one of the big areas that we're going to explore is around travel. So being able to get in and view packages that are maybe exclusive or the best type of packages for PGA Pro coaching or whatever it might be, but also create their own packages that will be able to, you know, sell on down the chain, if you like. And that's where it really ties in, is the area that we're exploring with the PGAs is the amateur golfer, particularly those that are really engaged in a coaching process with a professional, a PGA Pro, but also those who just have a general interest in that type of area of the game. And that will be through a subscription-based product, which is coaching, content, all that kind of information that I mentioned before for the members, but, you know, targeted towards the golfers at what they want and what they find interesting, as well as the travel offers and access to events and all those kinds of things. But importantly, being able to then connect the member to the golfer. And so we're working on ways that as an individual PGA Pro using the system, you'll be able to leverage the system to speak to your clients, to bring them into the fold as well. And then there's loads of opportunities about how we can take that further as well. And then really I suppose the scale, if you like, of the platform would come from the amateur side, but you're going to have this core of the PGAs having well-run organizations, the members being engaged in there and, you know, have a very clear point of access for their PGA and to access those benefits, but actually also facilitating their revenue generation and their business operations, their value generation as well. And that's really important. So it's not just about focusing on the PGAs and creating tools for them, which helps them deal with their members better. It's very much coming at it from the other angle as well, if you like, from the bottom up, coming at it and making sure that the individual member is basically engaged within this system so that they have opportunities to create business efficiencies, to create business opportunities, revenue generation as well. It's really, we see it very much as a facilitation platform. yes, it will do lots of different things and it will save time, it will save money, it will generate revenue, but it also facilitates activity. It allows us to have that basis where we can then say, okay, well, we've thought of this idea, we're going to plug that in, and away it goes, because the infrastructure and the base technology and the database, etc., is all there ready to go.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously it's been about 3 years, I think you said, and it's not there yet, but I think it's launching. Well, the expectation is we're going to try and launch end of the year, if not early 2022. In terms of that process, because I sort of joke with you that the platform and the project is very much just your brain on a map or on an iPad.
Yeah.
What has been I assume it's been a very evolving process where you've had to react to changes. Thinking more of a strategic level here now, what has been some of the key learnings for you going through this journey from start to where we are now?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's very easy to attack something like this and not really go into the detail that's required to get it done. I don't think detail is often a popular thing, because it doesn't necessarily get stuff done. But certainly what I've learned is the way that we've ideated, if that's the right way of putting it, and come up with more and more ideas and how this can work, is by really going into a lot of detail and ensuring that everything we're doing in terms of creating a particular function or looking at the platform overall or the project overall is absolutely watertight, in that it will enable us to do X, Y, Z. We can track X, Y, Z, and we know that the value that X, Y, Z and offer is what is desired. And that point really leads into sort of the second learning, which is you cannot underestimate how valuable just listening is, because we spent, I would say, so let's just broadly speaking say that the project's been 3 years. At least, if not more, half of that has been research. So literally sitting on calls just like we are now, speaking to the PGAs, speaking to individuals as well as sort of the organizations themselves, and understanding what their challenges are, what they're trying to do, what they're good at, what they're bad at, and really trying to consolidate that. And I was very lucky. I managed to go to, I think it was 9 different countries during 2019. And spend at least a day in the offices of the PGAs and sort of absorbing information, getting to know them and even better, and asking lots of different questions, making notes. Obviously in 2020, we had to do that virtually, but again, we've pretty much covered every single country in the membership, barring perhaps some of the newer ones who've joined. And we have a really strong understanding of, what makes them tick. And I find myself referring to those research notes almost on a weekly basis. Like even yesterday, I was sat rereading them for God knows how many, what number time, how many times I've read them, but incorporating them into elements that we're doing. A good example, some of the stuff Tom's been working on in terms of content planning and that kind of stuff, that research is directly referenced and directly feeding into that. And that's got to be a huge key learning when it comes to what we've done, but also digital strategy. It's about the audience, it's about who you're going to, and you've got to be able to make sure that you know what makes them tick, and you've got to be able to make sure that what you're doing is going to give them the value that they need. It's all very well us saying, well, this is good for us because it makes our business a bit more efficient. Well, ultimately, if we're not solving problems of the end user and we're not addressing their needs and wants, it ain't going to work. It's as simple as that. So I think that's been, that they're 2 elements that have been really, really important. But that's not to say that when it comes to sort of general digital strategy, actually, if you look at, and again, I just did this in the last couple of days, if you look back at our digital strategy document that Tom, you and I worked on, it's not long. It isn't detailed. That's not the point about it. It's about getting the ideas on the paper. But when it comes to actually getting on with the work, then it needs to be, detailed. You need to know exactly what makes these people tick to be able to service them. And that goes for individuals. It might be the PGAs, it might be the pros, it might be a commercial partner, whoever it is. We've got to understand how they work in order to be able to deliver that. and digital allows us to do that, as I mentioned earlier, in ways that we just haven't been able to do before.
Yeah, I think that was the last bit that you said about the digital strategy that we've worked on is actually quite short. But I think actually the takeaway from all of that, in summary, is that it's not to jump the gun. You need substance more than style. So by substance, I mean understanding who the audiences are. Because I'm just thinking, if a pro at a facility is thinking digitally, or they're thinking about they want to, get involved in this area more, they need to obviously. It can't just, okay, we're going to do a digital strategy here. You've got to plan it, think about it, understand what it's going to do, who it's for, etc., etc., etc. So thinking about the substance is and doing the research and being detailed in the approach is the important bit, I think, from that, which is the summary. So we've obviously focused on CPG here quite a bit around this area. Just want to get a bit of a broader context in terms of some of the organisations that are involved in this area. Are there any kind of good examples that you can think of perhaps organisations, can be in golf or just wider, and also maybe individuals actually too, with sort of strong digital mindsets and strategic thinking that you can think of?
Yeah, I think so. I'll try not to sort of rattle them off in too much of kind of a listing fashion, because I've got a few. There's a couple of sort of very clear, easy to understand golf specific ones, I feel like, that are very clear. But also, I think there's also some non-golf ones which might not be so clear, but actually there's a lot to learn from. So I think golf-wise, then the ones who always stand out, partly because we're relatively close to them, obviously a partner in Ryder Cup Europe with them is the European Tour. About, difficult to put a time frame on it, Tom, you might be a bit more accurate with my sort of estimation, but maybe 5 years, 4 or 5 years, something like that. The Tour have completely shifted just to being this absolute content powerhouse as part of their digital strategy, and bringing in a lot of data usage to that as well with their data specific partners. And I think that has really led the way, and they're able to come at it from two directions. I think they've got really intelligent planning behind it and really intelligent data use, and sort of, the analytics behind it is obviously clearly directing what they're doing, but equally they can come at it with this tone of voice, which is still really fun and entertaining, and they don't take themselves too seriously. I keep saying to people, it's golf at the end of the day, where we should be promoting, fun and entertainment and enjoyment as part of a, playing and taking part in a sport. And I think they do a really good job of that, to the point where, unless you're doing something like, the roles that you and I do, Tom, you won't notice that this stuff is happening. It's invisible. And if it's invisible, it probably means it's really good. So from an end user perspective, they're probably just thinking, this is really funny stuff and really like this. And it's actually, it gets shared and those kinds of videos go out and all that kind of stuff, I think is great. I think also Golf Digest have done a great job. Obviously, Golf Digest has been a print magazine for a long, long time, but they've really shifted into the digital space incredibly well, partly from having, a digital publication. So it's licensed through, you can get it through Apple News Plus and things like that. So you can read the digital version. You can subscribe to the digital only version. But not only that, they've gone a step further, and they've introduced through partnerships and different things like that, they've introduced the Golf Digest schools and on-demand video, OTT, over-the-top video channels and things like that, to do with coaching, to do with golf, entertaining, but also educational, and obviously American focused, but has had an impact around the world. So they've really shifted from a space where they could have got lost potentially, as everyone will probably know how, print has not fared so well in certain spaces, or at least print has to be quite unique now. They've really managed to kind of not get away from that, but actually ensure the business keeps going and has actually got better for it. And then the other key one, which I don't think anyone would be able to disagree with, is the Masters, because Augusta National, for a long, long, long time, were, I suppose the word, but might be accused of being a bit insular, being a bit closed. They've always been restrictive of things like, TV coverage. I was listening to the Masters podcast yesterday, and Bernard Langer was talking about how no one had ever seen the front nine because they never used to show the front nine on the TV coverage and things like that. Well, now that they couldn't be more opposite. They're doing so much. They introduced this year the fantasy leagues, which we did as a CPG team. We ran our own fantasy league as part of masters.com. They've got their app. They've got the ability to watch every single shot of every single player from across the whole tournament through the app, through the website. They've really shifted to digital, and I should imagine their commercial partners are very thankful for that. That there's so many opportunities that will be opened up through that space, but they've done it in a really considerate way so that they maintain the traditions of the Masters. They aren't, they aren't forgetting who they are. It still feels exclusive. You still don't see everything, but they've done it in a really fantastically effective way, in my opinion. And then just a couple of examples that are sort of outside of golf. There's a thing that I could talk for hours on, which I'm sure listeners will have heard of, called behavioral economics. And it's to do with how much effort you put in or how much investment you get put in and the amount of value that comes out. And often the investment level that is put in is often disproportionate to the amount of value that comes out. And so there's things that you can do that will create a big effect for very little money, very little effort. And actually they encourage behavior. And this ties into the digital strategy element anyway. And I don't want to go off on a complete tangent here, Tom, so stop me if I'm going on too long.
No worries.
But the behavior economics is nudging. People might have heard of nudging. In the UK, even the UK government had a nudge unit, and it's all about adjusting behavior. And when it comes to digital strategy, basically what we're trying to influence is people's behavior. It might be their behavior to go and watch a video, or it might be their behavior to open their wallet, buy a product or buy a ticket and go to an event or whatever it might be. But fundamentally, it's all about behavior. And so if you can treat that in an intelligent way without blowing the budget, then you're going to get some decent value out of it. And so there's a couple of simple examples. So one is, I don't know how available it is outside of the UK, but there's a company called Hive. They make digital thermostats and Wi-Fi connected light bulbs and things like that. Well, they nudge people to be a bit more environmentally friendly by simply sending you an email that compares your average temperature to the other people in your area. So the idea is that if your average temperature is higher than the others in the area, then you should probably lower your temperature and use less energy. And little things like that. Well, that's cost them probably, I don't know, maybe a couple of pounds or a couple of euros in terms of someone's time to set up a quick email that does that. But obviously the impact is massive. There's a less digital example that I always like, which is Virgin Atlantic. Not that I've ever been in upper class, or I think it's upper class or first class, but they used to have, and they may still have, salt and pepper shakers that were silver, either silver plate or solid silver for those customers. But they kept being stolen, and it was costing Virgin Atlantic a huge amount of money each year because they just had to keep buying these salt and pepper shakers. So all they did, rather than come up with some fancy new salt and pepper shaker that couldn't be stolen, they just stamped on the bottom of all the ones they had a little note that said stolen from Virgin Atlantic. And that nudge of people seeing that made them less likely to steal it, because then it would be obvious that they're onto me, they're watching me, that I might steal the salt and pepper shaker. So again, a really tiny thing that has a big impact. And there's so many of these things that can be done. And the digital strategy in the digital world has allowed these to happen, again, unlike any other method that you could find. And the main reason is it's to do with personalization and localization and that kind of thing, and that's what we want to focus on as well. So I've really gone on that one. Like I said, I could do a whole episode on behavior economics. I love it. But you understand the principles of that is that, even someone sitting in a golf club, sitting in a pro shop, you can do this stuff and you can have a big effect, but it doesn't have to cost you the earth. You don't have to go and spend thousands and thousands of euros building something. It doesn't have to work like that. There's lots of clever things that you can do as part of your strategy.
It's certainly, when I was planning this episode, didn't expect it to take a tangent going to salt and pepper. But there you go. And that's right. The power of digital. I'm just going back to the Masters point, actually, because I think a useful takeaway for me as I often refer to myself as a millennial or a Gen Z who's probably quite lazy in this space in terms of time and using things. The Masters to be fair, I wasn't actually going to watch too much, which is very criminal for a golf professional. But anyway, I'll admit that. But actually, going on to that fantasy league, for me, I got invested in it. So, you know, I ended up watching from start to finish. I don't think I missed a shot. And so what that demonstrates is actually the Masters tapping into this certain audiences that they perhaps wouldn't have gained if they hadn't have done products like Fantasy League, etc. So just wanted to use that as an example of why thinking strategically and digitally is important. I think for me, the only example I can think of that's really good that you haven't touched on, and I'm like a bit of a broken record with this one, is because I've subscribed to them, is Golfers Journal. They're a print magazine publication traditionally. They do some interesting content, but they've also created a sort of full digital platform and product where you can get all the content in there, and that's really good as well. But I think you've covered quite a lot of bases there, to be fair. So I'm running out of ideas. So then, just to conclude things, I mentioned obviously the project finish. We're sort of looking towards the end of the year. Is there any sort of update on when we think that might go live?
Yeah, so we worked. I mean, to be honest, 2020. You know, for all the awfulness that came with that year, and sort of, you know, to some extent continues into this year, it kind of gave us a little bit of breathing space, to be honest, and it allowed us to get on with a few things. The beginning of 2020 was really intense part of platform work that probably it would have been done, but it would have taken a lot longer. And actually it got us into a position where basically the second week of January this year in 2021, we dove headfirst into a 3-month-long intensive workshop-based discovery phase. And that's really given us the full blueprint of what we need. So now our desire is to get the build underway as soon as possible and to be able to deliver a first iteration product using an MVP, a minimum viable product model, where you create the sort of minimum that you need and then you iterate on top of that through phases. The desire is to get that MVP alive and kicking in time for our annual Congress, which is normally, you know, late November, early December. And I think we're actually on track to get in ahead of that, which would be great. And so that's really what we're focusing on now. And we have a pilot group of, I think it's 7 or 8 countries now, who are going to be close to us during that build process to allow us to, you know, keep ourselves in check and for them to input. And they've already been consulted throughout the research phase, but actually that will be their opportunity to be right in amongst the discussions as much or as little as they want to help guide us through that process. And so, yeah, that's the desire, is that as an organization, we kind of work from kind of February to February in terms of our sort of subscription cycle and how we deal with countries. So if we can get all of this in place nicely ahead of February, it completely changes, you know, our, I suppose, offering, if you like, to countries from then on throughout 2022 and onwards. And then it becomes about, you know, iterating new ideas, finding new ways of making the platform valuable, adding value to the users of the platform, and taking it from there. So fingers crossed, we'll be on phase, and it won't be long before we have certainly 6 months time. We should be flying, I think.
I think we'll have to cut this podcast short so we can allow you to get back to making sure it hits the deadline. No, that's great, Aston. Thank you ever so much for your time. That was really useful. I think me and you could talk digitally and marketing and all this sort of stuff all day. So very, very interesting to speak to you. And thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate your time. Is there anything you'd like to say just before we close off?
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. I think I think it's a really important and underrated area of what happens, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. And I think for anyone listening, whether they run a golf club, whether they work in a golf club, a pro, or whatever it is, I think that, you know, that there is something to be done in this area, and you can do it in a cost-effective way and a, you know, resource-effective way. And you've got to look at it. You've got to. There's no bones about it anymore. You've got to look into the digital world, whether you like it or not. And but don't be afraid of it. I suppose, you know, there's lots of stuff out there that can help.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
we're always open to helping people as well.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so we'll finish things off there. But thanks for coming on, and thank you to everybody for listening. We'll see you hopefully in the next episode of The Spin. Thanks for coming and thanks for joining.